Hello, and today we will be looking at the death of the Russian general deployed in Ukraine and also landslide in northern Tanzania, which had killed at least 47 people and injured 85 others. These and many more top stories making the rounds from across the globe. My name is Zainab Ibrahim, and this is from the studios of Viewer Television. The World Story starts now. Welcome back. My name is Zainab Ibrahim, and this is What Stories on Viewer Television. Today we will be bringing to you highlights of events that happened within the week under the review of the 4th to the 8th of December 2023. And we start with this Russian-Ukraine conflict. A Russian general has died while deployed in Ukraine, the governor of Russia's Voronezh region disclosed on the 4th December, the latest high-ranking Russian military figure to die during the 21-month offensive. Russian authorities rarely speak of their losses in Ukraine, but they have acknowledged the death of several high-ranking officers. Gusev paid tribute to Zavatsky, calling him a courageous officer, a real general, and a worthy man. However, he did not specify the circumstances of Zavatsky's death. Russian telegram channels with sources in the army said he was killed at the end of November after he stepped on a mine away from the front line, implying it could have been a device laid previously by Russian forces. The announcement comes as Russian troops are trying to seize Avdiivka, an industrial town in the eastern Donetsk region of Ukraine that has become one of the most contended parts on the front line. And now on environmental hazard, in an unfortunate deployment, landslide in northern Tanzania have killed at least 47 people and injured 85 others following landslide caused by torrential rain over the weekend. According to a local official, Queen Sendega, regional commissioner in the Manyara area of northern Tanzania, spoke to local media yesterday evening and warned that the death toll could rise. Heavy rains began on Saturday in the town of Katesh, around 300 kilometers north of the capital Dodoma. The rains caused flooding and then landslides. After a period of severe droughts, East Africa has in recent weeks been hit by torrential rain and flooding linked to the El Nino weather event, with the East African region extremely vulnerable to climate change. Extreme weather is increasingly likely. The landslide occurred as global leaders were meeting for the COP28 climate talks in Dubai. Tanzania's President Samia Suluhu Hassan offered her condolences to those affected by the landslide and said she had ordered the immediate deployment of resources to help victims. Now on to the Israel-Hamas war, which has been a recurring story, and the Israeli Prime Minister office said on 4th December that it had tallied the remains of 15 citizens that were being kept in Palestinian militants in the Gaza Strip since the Hamas attack of October 7, confirming 3 additional deaths of hostages held in Gaza Strip. It is said that the militants were now holding the remains of 15 people. The published list named the dead as 11 civilians and 4 soldiers, one of them a senior officer, although it did not elaborate further. You would recall that around 1,200 people, mostly civilians, died in the October 7 attack when Hamas fighters broke through Gaza's militarized border into Israel. Around 240 people were also taken hostage. Under an agreement between Israel and Hamas, 80 Israeli hostages were released in exchange for 3 times as many Palestinian prisoners during a 7-day truce that ended on Friday. Another 25, mostly tased, were freed separately. However, the Israeli army still maintains claims that 137 hostages were still being held in Gaza. I'm now on the issue of terrorist attacks. Following a series of attacks, the Malian army has said that it has intercepted 4 terrorist attacks in 4 localities in the north of the country, including one in the town of Menaka, surrounded by Islamic State jihadists. The Malian Armed Forces, also known as FAMA, has successfully repelled terrorist attacks against 4 military posts in the localities of Labezanga, Gosi, Tessalit, and Menaka, said a press release published. As a result, the relay antenna of the Orange Mile telephone operator in the city was damaged during the attack. According to a governorate official, making communications there very difficult. The collection and verification of information is complicated by the difficulty of accessing remote sites and independent sources in a generally degraded content. Since 2012, Mali has been plunged by the actions of groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda and Islamic State organization, violence by proclaimed self-defense groups, and banditry. The security crisis is coupled with a profound humanitarian and political crisis. The North, in particular, has been plagued by the intensification of military confrontation since August. The withdrawal of the UN mission pushed out by the ruling junta triggered a race for control of the territory between the army, jihadists, and separatists who have taken up arms against the central state. Now to Rwanda, talking about conducive business environment. The Rwanda government has urged Nigerian investors to take advantage of the abundant opportunities and conducive business environment to invest in the East African country. The country's ambassador designate to Nigeria, Christophe Bazivamo, stated this during an interactive session with key stakeholders of the Enugu Chamber of Commerce, Industry, Mines and Agriculture in his address. Bazivamo said that the ease of doing business in Rwanda is so guaranteed that the Rwanda government has a free visa policy for all Africans traveling to Rwanda. He noted that the objective of the interaction was to tell the Rwanda story to the business community in the Southeast and indeed Nigeria to attract them to do business and forge a stronger partnership between Rwanda and Nigeria. Also speaking during this session, the principal partner of FIT Consult Group, a real estate development company, Loretta Anyagolo, said that the Rwandan government has set as a target building 30,000 houses every year in Rwanda to cater for the people's shelter. Now talking about visa-free travel, China's foreign ministry said its visa-free travel policy has produced a clear effect, making things easier for travelers. Now the policy came into effect December 1st, and the ministry, citing immigration data, said about 7,000 of nearly 18,000 travelers from France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Spain, and Malaysia, the countries covered by the visa waiver, entered China in the first 3 days of the month. Daily average tourist numbers from those countries have risen by 39% on the first 3 days of December compared to on the last day of November. Germany's ambassador to Nigeria had expressed hope that China would extend the measures to all European Union members. Now, on fossil fuels, global carbon emissions from fossil fuels reached record levels again in 2023, as experts warned that the projected rate of warming that had not improved over the past 2 years. Now, the world is on track to have burned more coal, oil and gas in 2023 than it did in 2022. Now, according to a report by the Global Carbon Project, pumping 1.1% more planet-heating carbon dioxide into the atmosphere at a time when emissions must plummet to stop extreme weather from growing more violent. Now, the finding comes as world leaders meet in Dubai for the fourth COP28 Climate Summit. In a separate report published on Tuesday, Climate Action Tracker raised its projection slightly for future warming above the estimate it made at a conference in Glasgow 2 years ago. If the world continued to emit CO2 at that rate, then the international team of more than 120 scientists found it would burn through the remaining carbon budget for a half chance of keeping global heating to 1.5 above pre-industrial temperature in just 7 years.
Fuel in the world is coal. and we should stop killing ourselves using that coal, and that would do more to help health and change the flow of the carbon crisis.
Now, on COVID-19 pandemic, the UK former Prime Minister Boris Johnson has apologized for the pain and the loss caused by the COVID-19 pandemic as he began giving evidence at a public inquiry into his government's handling of the health crisis. Now, Johnson, who has faced a barrage of criticism from former aides for alleged indecisiveness and a lack of scientific understanding during the pandemic, is facing 2 days in the witness box. The UK former Prime Minister, who was forced from office last year over lockdown breaching parties held in Downing Street during the pandemic, accepted that mistake had unquestionably been made. He was briefly interrupted as a protester was ordered from the inquiry room after refusing to sit down during the apology. Recall that nearly 130,000 people died with COVID in the UK by mid-July 2021, one of the worst official per capita totals among Western nations.
The pain and the loss and the suffering
sit down.
Of
please stop.
COVID victims.
Please sit down. Please sit down, or I'm afraid you'll have to leave the hearing room. Right, ushers, please, could you ask them to leave?
That I understand the feelings of these victims and their families, and I am deeply sorry for the pain and the loss and the suffering of those victims and their families.
Now, talking about trade, the EU's top leaders will meet in China with President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Li Qiang for their first in-person summit since 2019 amid rising geopolitical and economic tension between Beijing and Brussels. Now, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Charles Michel will hold talks with Chinese leaders in Beijing on December 7 during a 2-day visit that will tackle several contentious issues that have strained ties between the bloc and China, including trade disputes and Beijing's support for Russia amid its war in Ukraine. Now, the summit comes amid deepening geopolitical crisis in Ukraine and the Middle East and is the first in-person gathering for leaders since Brussels adopted a more assertive stance towards Beijing, and economic slowdown raised questions about China's future. Now, an EU official familiar with the summit said Brussels is looking for practical dialogue on improving market access for European companies in China and will discuss the 27-country bloc's decision to launch a probe into Chinese subsidies for electric vehicles in a bid toward flow cheaper imports. Now, we will be going on a quick break, and when we return, What Stories continues. The government of Canada has announced that the cost of living financial requirements for study permit applicants will be raised significantly starting from January 1st, 2024. This, of course, would be a threat to the Nigerians who are fleeing to Canada for academic freedom. Now, this is What Stories and Viewer Television. Today, we will be bringing to you highlights of events that happened within the week under the review of the 4th to the 8th of December 2023. Moving on, let's talk about West African bank violence. The United States said it would refuse visas for extremist Israeli settlers behind a wave of violence against Palestinians in the West Bank, as it also asked Israel to do more to spare civilians in Gaza. Now, the visa measures amount to a rare concrete repercussion by the United States against Israelis in the nearly 2-month-old war, in which President Joe Biden has notched the U.S. ally privately but also promised strong support. Now, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the United States would refuse entry to any involved in undermining peace, security, or stability in the West Bank, or who takes actions that unduly restrict civilians' access to essential services and basic necessity. Similarly, the State Department spokesman Matthew Miller said that dozens of settlers who were not publicly named would be affected. Now, the visa ban also applies to their immediate family members. Restrictions on entry to the United States will not apply to extremist settlers who are U.S. citizens.
Bank this year is at levels not seen since the Second Intifada. And in recent weeks, an alarming surge in violent acts has driven this unwelcome record even higher. This includes unprecedented levels of violence by Israeli extremist settlers targeting Palestinians and their property, displacing entire communities, as well as violence by Palestinian extremist militants against Israeli civilians. Today, as President Biden recently warned, the United States is taking action to address this escalating violence in the West Bank by implementing a new visa restriction policy under Section 212A3C of the Immigration.
Now, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has begun a trip to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, hoping to shore up support in the Middle East from two major oil producers allied to the U.S. as his invasion of Ukraine grinds on. Now, Putin had landed in Abu Dhabi, the capital of the Emirates, as a federation of 7 sheikdoms now hosting the United Nations COP28 climate talk. It marked his first trip to the region since before the coronavirus pandemic and the war. And as he faces an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court over the war in Ukraine, neither Saudi Arabia nor the UAE has signed the ICC founding treaty, meaning they do not face any obligation to detain Putin over the warrant, accusing him of being personally responsible for the abductions of children from Ukraine during his war on the country. Now, Putin skipped a summit in South Africa over concerns he would be arrested on arrival there. As he arrived at Abu Dhabi's Qasr Al Watan Palace to meet Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the country's ruler, the UAE's military acrobatics team flew in formation with red, white, and blue smoke trailing them and the colors of the Russian flag. Now, talking about Russian polls, Russia has set March 17 as the date for a presidential election, which is expected to be another show-in for Vladimir Putin, who has silenced opposition during over 2 decades in power, in a meeting broadcast live on Russian television. Now, the upper house of parliament unanimously approved the date of the vote. The decision practically kicks off the presidential campaign. According to the head of the chamber, Valentina Matvienko, Putin, a former KGB agent who has been in power in Russia either as a president or prime minister since 1999, has not officially announced if he will stand in the vote for another 6-year mandate. Now, the 71-year-old is due to hold an end-of-year press conference next week, where he could announce his candidacy. It will be the first time he holds such a press conference since he ordered Russian troops into Ukraine in February 2022. Now, Russia has since said it has annexed the Ukrainian regions of Lugansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, even though Russian troops do not fully control them. However, voting is planned also in those regions. Now, talking about the immigration, former British Home Secretary Suella Braverman has urged Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to change course on immigration as his Conservative Party was torn over a bill to send illegal migrants to Rwanda. Now, Mr. Sunak is due to speak following the resignation of Immigration Minister Robert Jarrick. Jarrick explained in his resignation letter that the new version of the bill, which is due to be put to a vote by MPs, next week did not go far enough, adding to the pressure of the head of government just as the bill was being presented to Parliament. Now, Suella Braverman and her allies on the right wing of the Tories, who take a hard line to prevent migrant boats arriving across the Channel, urged Rishi Sunak to amend this bill, which they said was doomed to failure. Now, the new text should make it possible not to apply certain sections of British Human Rights Act to deportation, but it does not go so far as to sign up to London's withdrawal from the European Convention on Human Rights. Now, onto the bilateral ties. Cameroon's President Paul Biya has welcomed Gabon's transitional president Brice Oligui Nguema to Yaoundé for a short stint visit. Now, the Cameroonian leader is the latest to receive Oligui Nguema, who is on a tour of Central Africa states, asking for the lifting of economic sanctions on his country before the 2025 elections. Now, Nguema said he and President Biya discussed this in their closed-door meeting with some officials on how to boost economic ties between both nations. Nguema, who did not share specific details of the meeting, is reported by sources to have explained the reasons behind the coup and outlined the work of the transition he is leading up to the organization of the country's next democratic election. Nguema's 2-hour closed-door meeting with Biya ended the tour, which has taken him to Chad, the Central African Republic, Equatorial Guinea, and Republic of Congo since he seized power in August. Let's talk about the cost of living in Canada. Now, the government of Canada has announced that the cost of living financial requirements for study permit applicants will be raised significantly starting January 1st, 2024. Now, the government says the increase is necessary to ensure that international students are financially prepared for life in Canada, which has become significantly more expensive since the previous requirement was set. Now, this change announced by Immigration Minister Mark Miller reflects the rising cost of living in Canada, which has outpaced the previous financial requirements set in the early 2000s. Meanwhile, these long overdue changes will protect international students from financially vulnerable situations and exploitation. Now, Miller disclosed that starting January 1st, 2024, single study permits applicants will need to demonstrate that they have $20,335 available in addition to their first year of tuition and travel costs. He stated that the new threshold is based on 75% of the low-income cutoff, which represents the minimum income necessary to ensure basic needs are met.
Ahead of September 2024, we are prepared to take necessary measures, including significantly limiting visas to ensure that designated learning institutions provide adequate and sufficient student supports as part of the academic experience. In order to achieve this result, it is imperative that we work together with provincial and territorial governments, learning institutions, and other education stakeholders so we can ensure international students are set up for success in Canada. Enough is enough. If provinces and territories cannot do this, we will do it for them, and they will not like the bluntness of the instruments that we use. Our aim is to strike the right balance between welcoming international students and making sure they have all they need to thrive.
Now, salvos of rockets were launched at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad's heavily fortified green zone. Now, the mission said the latest in a flurry of such attacks amid the Israel-Hamas war. A multi-rocket attack was launched at U.S. and coalition forces in the vicinity of Union 3 and the Baghdad Embassy complex without causing any reported casualties or damage. A U.S. official said the United States leads an international coalition battling jihadists in Iraq and neighboring Syria, and its forces have come under repeated attack in recent weeks. Now, the attacks come against the backdrop of the more than 2-month war between U.S. ally Israel and the Iran-backed Palestinian Islamist militant group Hamas in the Gaza Strip. In a statement, the U.S. Embassy said 2 salvos of rockets were fired at the mission compounded at around 4:15 a.m. Now let's talk about immigration plan. Now the UK leader Rishi Sunak has defiantly insisted that his latest immigration plan will work, as the issue threatened to tear apart his ruling Conservative, putting his premiership in jeopardy. Now Sunak came out fighting after his government's latest attempt to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda sparked the resignation of his immigration minister, who said it did not go far enough. His ex-interior minister, Suella Braverman, also said the law was destined to fail and urged Sunak to change course on immigration. Now, a major political battleground in next year's expected general election. At a hastily convened news conference in Downing Street, the Prime Minister sought to appease right-wing Tories who want him to withdraw Britain from the European Court of Human Rights to stop courts from blocking removal. Now, he also denied that a vote on the Rwanda legislation expected in Parliament next week would amount to a confidence vote on his leadership. Now, Russia pre-elections. Now, the Russian leader Vladimir Putin has decided to run in presidential elections next March, allowing the Kremlin leader to extend his decades-long grip on power. Now, Putin told Lieutenant Colonel Artyom Zuga, a Russian military officer, about his decision to participate in the upcoming vote following an award ceremony for army personnel at the Kremlin, state-run news agencies reported. Now, Putin, however, has yet to make a formal announcement that he will compete in the vote scheduled to take place between March 15 to 17 next year. Meanwhile, it is expected that Putin will not face any major challenges and will likely seek as big as a mandate as possible in order to conceal domestic discord over the Ukraine conflict, analysts said. Now, this is all we can bring to you today on What Stories Today. Do join us same day next time. My name is Zainab Ibrahim.